On the afternoon of Saturday, September 18, 1954, a 49-year-old Welsh archaeologist named William Francis Grimes stood at the bottom of a muddy trench in the city of London, watching the final hours of an excavation slip away. He had been given weeks to examine a bomb-damaged site on Walbrook Street before construction crews would pour the foundations for a 14-story office block. The dig had revealed fragments of Roman walls, timber posts blackened by centuries of burial, and the unmistakable curve of what appeared to be an apse. But Grimes could not determine what the building had been. A church, perhaps. A public hall. Something worthy of note, certainly, but nothing that would halt the relentless machinery of post-war reconstruction. The workmen around him were already thinking of the weekend. One of them, clearing soil from a cluster of stones, tossed aside what he took to be a rough chunk of masonry. A nearby archaeologist retrieved it, brushed away the dirt, and froze. What emerged from the London clay was a face carved in Italian marble, serene features, curling hair, and a distinctive conical cap tilted forward on the brow. It was the god Mithras. And the building Grimes had spent weeks excavating was not a church at all. It was a temple, 17 centuries old, dedicated to a mystery cult so secretive that its rituals had never been written down. In the frantic years of post-war rebuilding, amid the scaffolding and bulldozers transforming the bombed-out city, the most significant Roman discovery in British history had surfaced on the final day of a dig that was never supposed to find anything remarkable. Grimes understood immediately what he was looking at. He also understood what would happen next. The site belonged to Legal and General, and their office block would not wait. He had 2 weeks, perhaps less, to excavate what remained of a building that had survived the fall of Rome, the Great Fire of London, and the Blitz, only to face destruction by insurance underwriters. It was a race he was determined not to lose. By the mid-1950s, the City of London existed in 2 dimensions simultaneously. Above ground, cranes swung steel beams into place, and concrete mixers rumbled through streets still scarred by German incendiaries. Below ground, preserved in the waterlogged mud of buried rivers, lay the remains of Londinium, the Roman settlement founded nearly 2,000 years earlier on the banks of the Thames. The Blitz had been catastrophic for London's living, but for its dead, the destruction had opened a window. Bomb craters exposed archaeological layers that had been sealed beneath Victorian warehouses and medieval cellars for centuries. In 1946, the Society of Antiquaries established the Roman and medieval London Excavation Council to investigate these sites before developers reclaimed them. The council operated on a government grant of £2,000 per year, a sum that covered little more than basic wages and hand tools. Everything else depended on the goodwill of construction companies willing to delay their schedules and the stamina of archaeologists willing to work in freezing mud. Grimes, a veteran of the legendary Sutton Hoo excavation and director of the London Museum, led the council's efforts. He had spent the post-war years racing from site to site, salvaging what he could before the concrete poured. Some digs yielded treasures, most yielded fragments. All of them ended the same way, with the grinding of machinery and the sealing of the past beneath the present. The Walbrook site had seemed unremarkable. The street that bore the river's name marked the course of a tributary that once flowed through the heart of Roman London before emptying into the Thames. The Walbrook had been buried for centuries, but its oxygen-starved mud had preserved organic materials with extraordinary fidelity. Leather shoes, wooden tools, the detritus of daily life in an ancient city. Grimes had hoped to find such objects. He had not expected to find a building, but buildings in the Walbrook Valley were common enough. What mattered was what kind of building. And until September 18th, Grimes did not know. The marble head changed everything. A photographer from the Sunday Times happened to be on site that afternoon, and by the following morning, the discovery was front-page news across Britain. Within days, the excavation had become a national event. An estimated 400,000 people descended on the open trench over the following 2 weeks. Queues stretched half a mile around the block, 5 deep in places. On the first day of public access, 35,000 visitors arrived. 5,000 were turned away when the site closed at 6 o'clock. The excavation was open to the public only between 4:30 and 6 in the evening, yet still the crowds came, waiting for hours in lines that snaked past bombed-out buildings and construction hoardings. At one point, the crowd grew so frustrated with the wait that they attempted to rush the police barriers. The Times declared that there was something grievously wrong with British planning if an antiquity of this importance could be destroyed almost before it had been seen. The question reached the cabinet twice. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who had championed the preservation of historic buildings throughout his career, demanded that his Minister of Works inspect the site personally. Churchill forced Legal and General to abandon their plans to destroy the foundations outright, and secured a 3-week extension for further excavation, funded by the Ministry of Works. During those precious additional weeks, Grimes and his team uncovered the largest collection of Roman marble sculpture ever found in Britain. There was a bearded head of Serapis, the Greco-Egyptian god of the underworld, a figure of Mercury, messenger of the gods, a striking group of Dionysus, with a satyr, a river god that some believed represented the Thames itself, a silver ceremonial box, and a strainer used for ritual purification, and most remarkably, evidence that these objects had been deliberately buried beneath the temple floor centuries earlier, hidden by worshippers who knew their faith was dying and wanted to protect their sacred images from destruction. The temple, Grimes now understood, had been built around 240 AD on the east bank of the Walbrook, designed to simulate the cave in which Mithras had performed his central miracle, the slaying of a sacred bull whose blood renewed the world. Mithraism had spread across the Roman Empire in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, attracting soldiers, merchants, and administrators to its secret rituals and its promise of salvation through initiation. Women were forbidden entirely. Members called themselves syndexioi, meaning those united by the handshake, and they progressed through 7 grades of enlightenment, each associated with a celestial body, each requiring tests of endurance and oaths of silence so binding that virtually no written records of their practices survive. What Grimes had found was not merely a ruin, it was a window into a lost religion, a faith that had rivaled early Christianity for the souls of the Roman world before vanishing so completely that even its prayers had been forgotten. But preserving the temple in place would cost £500,000, the equivalent of the entire annual government budget for historic buildings. In post-war Britain, still rationing food and rebuilding bombed-out housing, the money did not exist. The compromise was a promise. Legal and General would fund the careful dismantling of the temple and its reconstruction nearby, while the ministry would pay for thorough excavation and recording. The temple would be saved. It would simply be moved. On October 12, 1954, barely a month after the marble head emerged from the mud, the Temple of Mithras was lifted from the ground and removed. The reconstruction that opened 8 years later was a disaster. The temple's stones had spent years in storage at a builder's yard in New Malden, where some materials were pilfered, and the original timber benches, now recognized as extraordinarily rare artifacts, were thrown away. Individual stones had not been numbered during dismantling. The rebuild relied on photographs alone. When the reconstruction finally opened in 1962 at Temple Court on Queen Victoria Street, approximately 100 meters from the original site, the result was unrecognizable. The temple had been raised to street level in an open-air setting, exposed to rain and sunlight, when Mithraic worship demanded subterranean darkness. It had been repositioned on a north-south axis instead of its original east-west alignment. It had been assembled with hard modern cement on a crazy paving floor, replacing the earthen surfaces where initiates had once knelt. The Ministry of Work's own assessment acknowledged the structure was built on the wrong site, at the wrong level, and on the wrong orientation. Grimes, who had fought so hard to save the temple, delivered the most damning verdict. The result, he wrote, was virtually meaningless as a reconstruction of a Mithraeum. For nearly 50 years, the botched reconstruction stood in a windswept courtyard, visited by tourists who could not understand what they were seeing, ignored by Londoners who walked past without a second glance. It earned its own bus stop, became a minor curiosity on walking tours, and slowly weathered in the elements it was never meant to endure. The most significant Roman discovery in British history had become an archaeological embarrassment, a monument to good intentions gone wrong. In 2010, Bloomberg LP purchased the site for its new European headquarters. What followed was the largest archaeological excavation in London's history. A 3-acre dig conducted by the Museum of London Archaeology, with a team of more than 50 specialists working for nearly 4 years. Sophie Jackson, who led the excavation, would later compare the preservation conditions in the Walbrook mud to the ash of Pompeii or the lava of Herculaneum. The results were staggering. More than 14,000 Roman artifacts emerged from the waterlogged soil, along with 63,000 pottery fragments and 3 tons of animal bones. Evidence of over 50 Roman buildings was identified. But the most remarkable finds were 405 wooden writing tablets, preserved in the airless silt, their surfaces still bearing the scratched impressions of messages written nearly 2 millennia ago. Deciphered by Oxford scholar Roger Tomlin, the tablets proved to be Britain's largest, earliest, and most significant collection of Roman documents. One dated January 8, 57 AD, recorded that a freedman named Tibullus owed another freedman named Gratus 105 denarii. It was the oldest dated handwritten document ever found in Britain. Another dated between 65 and 80 AD contained the earliest known written reference to London, Londinio Mogontio, meaning in London, to Mogontius, predating the historian Tacitus by approximately 50 years. A third, dated October 21, 62 AD, described a contract for transporting provisions from St Albans to London, evidence that the city had begun rebuilding barely a year after Boudicca's armies burned it to the ground. These were not histories written by emperors. They were the voices of ordinary people. Merchants tracking debts, scribes practicing their alphabets, freedmen conducting business in a city at the edge of the known world. Tomlin compared deciphering their handwriting to the work of the codebreakers at Bletchley Park. What a privilege, he wrote, to eavesdrop on the people who founded London. The reconstruction of the temple took 8 years of research and 18 months of physical work. The 1962 reconstruction was carefully dismantled using diamond-tipped saws to cut through the cement without damaging the Roman stones. The temple was placed 7 meters below modern street level, approximately at its original Roman depth, restored to its correct east-west orientation, with an earthen floor meticulously recreated and atmospheric lighting designed to simulate the darkness of a Mithraic cave. A large majority of the stones and bricks are original Roman material, the same stones that Grimes had excavated more than 60 years earlier. On November 14, 2017, the London Mithraeum Bloomberg space opened to the public. Admission was free. It remains free today. The temple now occupies the basement of a building that cost £1 billion to construct, designed by Lord Norman Foster and recognised as one of the most sustainable office buildings in the world. The structure won the RIBA Sterling Prize in 2018. Visitors descend through galleries displaying more than 600 Roman artifacts before entering the reconstructed ruins in near total darkness. Theatrical fog drifts across the stone columns. Latin chanting echoes from unseen speakers. Light beams materialize the walls and benches for a 7-minute immersive sequence that attempts to evoke what worshippers experienced 1700 years ago. More than 600,000 people have made that descent since 2017. The major marble sculptures from Grimes's 1954 excavation remain at the London Museum. In 2024, Bloomberg donated the entire 14,000-piece collection from the modern excavation and a £20 million gift to support the museum's transformation. Michael Bloomberg himself reflected on the strangeness of history's cycles. Perhaps in 1800 years, he suggested, Londoners would discover the remains of his building and consider the Bloomberg terminal as primitive as the tools now displayed from the Roman temple. Grimes did not live to see the temple restored. He passed in 1988, 34 years after his discovery, remembered as one of the foremost archaeologists of his generation, but haunted by the knowledge that his greatest find had been reduced to a curiosity. He had understood, perhaps better than anyone, that excavation without preservation was merely destruction by another name. The cult of Mithras believed that salvation came through stages, through trials endured in darkness, and through secrets shared only with those who had proven themselves worthy. Its temples were built underground because the faithful believed that truth lay beneath the surface of things, hidden from those who would not descend to find it. 7 meters below the trading floors and server rooms of Bloomberg's European headquarters, the stones of a Roman temple still stand where soldiers and merchants once knelt in candlelight, pledging oaths that bound them to silence. The rituals have been forgotten, the prayers have been lost, but the walls remain, waiting for those willing to go down and look. Some things survive by being remembered. Others survive by being buried.